Welcome to When Gen X Ruled the Multiplex, where I look at the films that shaped the MTV generation. Earlier this year, I looked at Ridley Scott's groundbreaking and highly influential sci-fi film from 1982, Blade Runner. Today I'm looking at Scott's less influential follow-up to Blade Runner, the 1986 fantasy film Legend. The screenplay for Legend was written by William Hjortsberg, whose novel Falling Angel was later adapted into Alan Parker's 1987 horror film Angel Heart. Scott approached Hjortsberg about creating an original dark fairy tale, something like Jean Cocteau's acclaimed 1946 filmed version of Beauty and the Beast. Hjortsberg wrote an ambitious epic, which was too grand for what Scott had envisioned. After multiple revisions, the story was pared back to its barest bones, and in the end, the finished film was heartbreakingly gorgeous, but lacking in substance. We open in a fantasy realm populated by magical creatures, including a pair of unicorns who are the guardians of all things good in the world. The Lord of Darkness wants to bring perpetual night to the land by killing the unicorns and harnessing the powerful magic contained in their horns. He sends his goblin henchman Blix to hunt down the unicorns. Blix is played by Alice Playton, who, like many of the performers in Legend, is hidden underneath layers of elaborate prosthetics. The makeup effects are the work of Rob Bottin, who did the wonderfully grotesque alien effects in John Carpenter's The Thing, which I looked at a while back, and who received a well-deserved Oscar nomination for his work on Legend. Clad in a virginal white gown, the beautiful Princess Lily cavorts in the woods. Lily is played by Ferris Bueller's Day Off's Mia Sara, making her film debut. Legend was filmed at Pinewood Studios in England on the 007 stage, the famous home of James Bond. Ridley Scott built a detailed forest set, and 11 days before the scheduled end of filming, the entire soundstage burned down to the ground while everyone was on a lunch break. Lily is trailed by Blix and his goblin henchmen, Pox and Blunder. Pox is played by Peter O'Farrell, while Blunder is played by Kieran Shaw. Lily visits a friend, a peasant woman named Nell, played by Tina Martin, who lives in a rustic cottage. Deep in the forest, Lily meets with Jack, her semi-feral boyfriend. Jack is played by Tom Cruise, already a rising star from Risky Business. Less than a month after Legend flopped in U.S. theaters in the summer of 1986, Top Gun, which was directed by Tony Scott, Ridley Scott's younger brother, would make Cruise one of Hollywood's most bankable stars. The most interesting thing about Jack is that he will spend the entire film not wearing any pants, and if your particular fetish is staring at Tom Cruise's bare hamstrings, boy have I got a film for you. Jack leads Lily to a wooded glen to show her the unicorns. Defying Jack's warning, Lily approaches them and strokes one on the muzzle. Hiding in the bushes, Blix shoots one of the unicorns with a poisoned dart, and the unicorns flee in terror. The injured unicorn stumbles to the ground and dies, and the goblins saw off its horn. As the skies ominously darken, Lily tosses a ring into the river and claims she'll marry whomever finds it. Jack dives off a bridge to retrieve it, and the river immediately freezes over, as does the entire land. Jack breaks through the ice and searches for Lily, who runs through the frozen forest, having done jack all to try to save her lover. She makes her way to Nell's cottage and finds Nell has frozen to death. Jack collapses in the woods, which is exactly what happens when you wander around in a snowstorm without any pants on. He's roused by an assortment of fairy creatures led by an elf named Honeythorn Gump, who is played by Swiss actor David Bennett, who was the child star of 1979's The Tin Drum. Gump's companions include a pair of dwarves, Brown Tom, played by Cork Hubbard, and Screwball, played by Billy Barty. Jack and Gump and the dwarves drink elderberry wine, then head off in search of the unicorns. They find one unicorn dead and its horn sawn off, with its bereaved mate guarding its body. Jack vows to get the stolen horn back to return warmth to the world. Una, a fairy who appears as a ping-pong ball of light, leads Jack to a treasure trove. There he finds a sword and a golden suit of armor, yet still no pants. Una appears to Jack in human form, played by Annabelle Layton, and confesses her love for him. When Blunder tries to steal the horn from Blix, the dead arise from the earth and drag him off to the Lord of Darkness's castle. Brown Tom guards the unicorns. Lily tries to warn him that goblins are nearby, but the goblins attack and capture Lily and the surviving unicorn. Upon learning from Brown Tom that Lily and the unicorn have been carried off by the goblins, Jack and his friends begin a quest to save them. They reach the Lord of Darkness's castle, which is surrounded by a swamp. They're attacked by a grotesque creature named Meg Mucklebones, played by Robert Picardo, Star Trek Voyager's holographic doctor. Meg Mucklebones lusts openly for Jack and proclaims her intention to eat him. Jack flirts with her, then chops her head off. Jack and his traveling companions enter the castle and wind up in the dungeon. They meet Blunder, who turns out to be a former elf who now regrets embracing the dark side. Meanwhile, the Lord of Darkness is horny for Lily, so he sets about trying to seduce her. A faceless woman in a dark gown dances with Lily, and at the end of the dance, Lily and the faceless woman have merged into one. Lily has transformed into a slinky and sexed-up version of herself, complete with black lipstick and a glittery black gown with a neckline that plunges as low as it reasonably can. As Lily stares at her reflection, the Lord of Darkness emerges from a giant mirror, and we see him in his full glory for the first time. The Lord of Darkness is played by screen legend Tim Curry, star of the Rocky Horror Picture Show, and if you take nothing else away from Legend, you will remember Tim Curry's performance as the Lord of Darkness. The Lord of Darkness is essentially Satan, complete with hooved feet, shiny red skin, and twin horns emerging from his head. The prosthetic makeup is glorious, and so is Tim Curry's performance. Not gonna lie, if you're anything like me, the first half of Legend could easily put you to sleep, and then Tim Curry shows up, and all of a sudden your attention is riveted to the screen. A besotted Lord of Darkness invites Lily to a lavish dinner, which consists of a towering stack of molded Jell-O salads. The Lord of Darkness tells a terrified Lily that he will slaughter the last unicorn at nightfall to plunge the world into darkness forever. Pretending to have been seduced over to the dark side, Lily demands to kill the remaining unicorn herself. The Lord of Darkness gives her a sword, but she uses it to set the unicorn free. Jack arrives and battles the Lord of Darkness, who misses several perfect opportunities to nick Jack's exposed femoral artery when Jack leaps around without any pants on. Jack impales the Lord of Darkness on the severed unicorn horn, while his companions flood the castle with reflected daylight from the rising sun. The Lord of Darkness is sucked into a dark vortex, and light and warmth is restored to the world. Gump restores the horn to the dead unicorn and brings it back to life. Lily has fallen into an enchanted slumber. Jack retrieves her ring from the river and puts it on her finger, then rouses her with a kiss while the unicorns frolic in a meadow. The original cut of Legend ran close to 2 hours long. On the recommendation of the studio, Ridley Scott trimmed it down to 90 minutes without altering the story in any substantive way. Prior to its US release, the film was also given an entirely different score. The shorter US theatrical release featured a synth-heavy score by electronica pioneers Tangerine Dream, plus a song by Roxy Music frontman Brian Ferry titled Is Your Love Strong Enough? A director's cut, which was released on DVD in 2002, restored the more traditional score that Scott originally wanted for the film. It was composed by Jerry Goldsmith, who had provided the score for Scott's Alien in 1979. While Goldsmith composed a classic dramatic score, the Tangerine Dream score and the Brian Ferry song work much better with the film, at least to my Gen X ears. These days, viewers are primed to expect big classic scores for films with fantastic elements, like Howard Shore's scores for the Lord of the Rings films, or John Williams's scores for the Harry Potter films, or Alan Silvestri's scores for a bunch of films in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. But in the 80s, the pairing of electronic music and fantasy films seemed very natural, especially to us members of the MTV generation. MTV and music videos were so dominant among young Gen Xers that we were very comfortable with hearing synth-pop or new wave music while watching images that depicted fantasy or sci-fi themes. While I always respect a director's original vision, I prefer Legend's theatrical release to the director's cut, both for the soundtrack and because the deficiencies in the story and the characterizations are a lot easier to tolerate when the film clocks in at a brisk 90 minutes. Legend showcases Ridley Scott's genius for visual world building. The film looks like a Maxfield Parrish painting come to life, but the story is shockingly flat. With its mixture of quests and curses and fairies and princesses and goblins and elves, Legend draws from classic fairy tales, which are a fantastic source of inspiration. But fairy tales in their most basic form are for small children. They're simple morality tales of good and bad that children are taught to learn about the concepts of right and wrong. If you adapt the popular archetypes of fairy tales, princesses, heroes, quests, curses, witches, castles, what have you, to make entertainment for anyone other than small children, you have to flesh those archetypes out and give them nuances and make them live and breathe. And that's where Legend goes astray. No matter how much effort the actors put into the role, at no point do Lily and Jack seem like real people. There's no sense of either of them having any kind of life other than what we see on the screen. As beautiful as they are to look at, they're boring. There's no pleasure in spending time with them, and that applies to Blix, Pox, Blunder, Honeythorn Gump, Brown Tom, Screwball, and Una as well. The only character in Legend who breathes with any kind of inner life is the Lord of Darkness, and that's because he has a defined personality and he has nuances. His love of destruction and evil is tempered by his fascination with and lust for Princess Lily, the embodiment of purity and goodness. That's interesting, and as soon as the Lord of Darkness starts trying his damnedest to woo Lily, the film becomes a whole lot more dynamic. Legend is now regarded as an example of terminal cinema because it killed a genre. Fantasy films aimed at the young members of Generation X had been building momentum over the first half of the 80s, with films like The Neverending Story, The Dark Crystal, Return to Oz, Lady Hawk, and Labyrinth. Many of those had been commercial disappointments, but they collectively suggested there was a built-in audience of young viewers for fantasy films. That audience failed to embrace Legend, which dampened Hollywood's enthusiasm for youth-focused fantasy. The second half of the decade still delivered an additional pair of studio-financed fantasy films: Rob Reiner's The Princess Bride in 1987 and Ron Howard's Willow in 1988. In both of those cases, though, the studio had to be talked into taking a gamble on another fantasy film. When Legend is remembered these days, it's for Tim Curry's brilliant performance as the Lord of Darkness and for that instantly iconic character design. The Lord of Darkness has had more staying power than the film that spawned him. A 2020 commercial for the dating app Match, which was produced by card-carrying Gen Xer Ryan Reynolds, featured the Lord of Darkness looking for love. If the rest of the film had managed to reach that same level of enduring appeal as that one character, Legend would be remembered today as a 1980s classic instead of a cautionary tale. Next time, we are looking at Michael J. Fox's other film from the summer of 1985. Yep, I'm talking about Teen Wolf. Thank you for joining me here today. I will meet you back here for that.